From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
This is not an attack on Jeremiah Wright. It has nothing to do with Senator Obama. It is an attack on the black church launched by people who know nothing about the African-American religious tradition.
I've known Reverend Wright for almost 20 years. The person I saw yesterday was not the person that I met 20 years ago. His comments were not only divisive and destructive, but I believe that they end up giving comfort to those who prey on hate.
Senator Barack Obama denounces his former pastor, Reverend Jeremiah Wright. We host a debate with Princeton University professor Melissa Harris Lacewell and University of Pennsylvania professor Adolph Reed Jr. on Reverend Wright and his impact on Senator Obama's campaign. Then, a discussion on military contractors in Iraq. Investigative journalist and Corp Watch managing editor Perthap Chatterjee is just back from Iraq. We'll talk to him about KBR and intelligence contractors L3 and Titan. We'll also speak to a former translator with Titan. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Juan Gonzalez. Amy Goodman is on the road. She'll be hosting tomorrow from California. The U.S.-led offensive against Shia fighters in Iraq has reached what could be its deadliest point to date. On Tuesday, residents of the Baghdad neighborhood of Sadr City said a U.S. assault left at least 50 people dead and 130 injured, many of them women and children. A U.S. airstrike was said to have destroyed at least 3 homes and buried families beneath the rubble.
A catastrophe. If you've not heard of a catastrophe, this is one. An earthquake carried out by a vengeful being.
The U.S. military disputed local accounts, saying it killed dozens of armed fighters. More than 500 people have been killed since the crackdown on forces loyal to Shia cleric Muqtada al-Sadr began last month. The United Nations has announced plans to form a top-level task force to address the global food crisis. Aid experts say soaring global prices for food and fuel threaten to push 100 million people worldwide into hunger. The rise has been attributed to several factors, including bad weather, the higher price of oil, and the diversion of crops to produce biofuels for cars. On Tuesday, the civil rights leader, Reverend Jesse Jackson, visited Haiti, where he called for emergency aid.
We want to immediately meet with leaders of our Congress and the Food Market Institute to address the issue of adequate food for Haiti in this coming emergency period. Secondly, in the meantime, Haiti's farm rice producers need to rebuild their infrastructure, tractors and transportation and seeds. It's going to take about a year to do that. So in the emergency time, we need rice and wheat and cooking oil now.
Earlier this month, 5 Haitians were killed during protests over the rising cost of food. Meanwhile, at the White House, President Bush said he is concerned about food prices, but dismissed biofuels as a major factor.
In terms of the international situation, we are deeply concerned about food prices here at home, and we're deeply concerned about people who don't have food abroad. In other words, scarcity is of concern to us. Last year, we were very generous in our food donations, and this year we'll be generous as well.
Earlier this year, the Bush administration announced it would scale back emergency food aid to some of the world's poorest countries this year because of soaring prices. Latin American and European leaders are currently meeting in Peru for talks on poverty and social inequality. On Tuesday, Peruvian Congress member Luis Gonzalez called on rich nations to shift spending priorities.
Thousands of children in Latin America die from hunger, malnutrition, and the lack of primary medical care. Because of that, we feel that the millions spent on arms, the rise in gas prices that is destabilizing the economies of our poor countries, climate change, and terrorism are the new ills of the apocalypse that is shaking Latin America and threatening our institutions.
In Zimbabwe, opposition leaders are accusing supporters of President Robert Mugabe of a new round of violence. Members of the Movement for Democratic Change say gangs linked to Mugabe's political party have targeted neighborhoods that voted against Mugabe in elections last month. At the United Nations, Tendai Biti of the Movement for Democratic Change called for international intervention.
There is a systematic violence that is being unleashed by the state against the people of Zimbabwe. There is complete militarization of the society, and the country itself is being run by military, quasi-civilian junta chaired by Mugabe himself.
Tensions have risen in Zimbabwe in the months since the election, with final results still to be announced. In Burma, the oil giant Chevron is being accused of supporting human rights abuses in protection of a gas pipeline. Earth Rights International says the Burmese military has committed rape and murder while guarding the pipeline that moves gas from the Yadana gas field. Chevron has a 28% stake in the Yadana project. On the campaign trail, Senator Barack Obama has sharply denounced his former pastor, Reverend Jeremiah Wright. Wright broke his media silence this week since the controversy over his alleged views on issues including U.S. foreign policy and the 9/11 attacks. On Tuesday, Senator Obama condemned what he called Reverend Wright's, quote, divisive and destructive comments.
The person I saw yesterday was not the person that I met 20 years ago. His comments were not only divisive and destructive, but I believe that they end up giving comfort to those who prey on hate, and I believe that they do not portray accurately the perspective of the black church. They certainly don't portray accurately my values and beliefs.
Obama has previously distanced himself from Reverend Wright's political beliefs, but refused to repudiate his former pastor, whom he likened to a family member. More on this story after headlines. On the Republican side, Senator John McCain has unveiled the health care plan he'll campaign on this November. At a speech in Tampa, Florida, McCain called for a similar approach to President Bush's failed health care effort. Tax rebates would go to individuals seeking private insurance outside of company health plans. McCain says he'd promote the use of health savings accounts and grants for hospitals that cut costs. And McCain vowed to create a program to help care for vulnerable Americans, but offered no details. A new study released Tuesday from the Kaiser Family Foundation shows nearly 1/3 of Americans have faced major difficulties paying for medical care or health insurance in the past year. 1/4 of workers say they made job decisions based primarily on health care considerations. And new figures show home foreclosures continue to rise. According to Realty Track, more than 155,000 families have lost their homes to foreclosure this year. That's more than double the number over the same 3-month period last year. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Juan Gonzalez.